I knew nothing about Portugal. I'd never been to Portugal, but I knew that Portugal was affordable. It was sunny. It had a visa for people who were self-employed that I could afford, because I thought of all European countries as having like the golden visas. Like that was the only option. Like you either had to marry into it or you had to buy your way in. And Portugal had had a good visa option, but the information to try to figure out what you need was impossible. It was completely conflicting.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 245 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. On a special note, next week's episode will mark the 5th anniversary of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. And I'm planning to take you on my journey into podcasting. This week, I'm speaking with my dear friend and colleague, Susan Lahey. Susan is a freelance writer who has worked with me on all 3 of my Repurpose Your Career books. I had Susan originally on the podcast in episode 54, and then did an encore episode with an update in episode 122. Susan took you on her journey and how she went from a journalist to being a freelance writer. This is a much more difficult transition than you might think. In 2019, Susan decided to move her freelance writing business to Port Portugal after all 3 of her children had graduated from college. I wanted Susan to take you on her journey of becoming an expat, but more importantly, setting up her business in Europe. Why am I doing this? Because I know a lot of you want to do this. However, before we get to the episode, let's have a word from our sponsor, Career Pivot. The Career Pivot membership community continues to help members who are participating in this project grow and thrive. This is a community where everyone is there to help everyone else out, figure out what to do in the second half of life, and then make it happen. Let's hear what Russ had to say about being part of the community.
At first, I got a lot out of the community, just meeting new people and finding folks in my phase of life, and that was really encouraging. As I've been in it a longer time, I'm now realizing that I have a community that knows me. And this is people who know me in a new way. And that is something that I've really come to realize that it's kind of, I don't really want to part with it because I do know that community and over the last several years that I've been part of it. It's valuable in terms of support. It's also valuable in terms of accountability. And I find that, I always get questions asked to me. I also learn things. For example, the idea of pivoting to do some online appearances is an idea that came out of a career pivot. We had an evening where we talked about how to do that. I'm also teaching classes with something called Get Set Up, and a member of the Career Pivot community kind of recruited me to come teach classes with Get Set Up. So it was a good contact. I'm over 60 and heading toward the middle of that decade, and I find that we are a unique group. Some of us, like me, don't ever have plans on retiring. We just want to find work that we love for the rest of our life. I find Career Pivot has people in there like that. And, it's kind of hard to know where to find that. They're also from all over the place, which I appreciate the diversity of experiences that people bring to the community.
I'm recruiting new members to the next cohort. If you are interested in learning more about the endeavor, please go to careerpivot.com/community. Now, on to my discussion with Susan Lahey. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I am really excited because I have Susan, my buddy, Susan Lahey, who is the co-author on all my Repurpose Your Career books, on the podcast again. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. What a great intro.
Susan lives in Porto, Portugal. And I knew Susan, we met, in 2011?
Yes.
And what I wanted Susan on here is to talk about, number one, her journey of moving her business from the US to Europe. And two, how does she run her business there? Because yes, she's a freelance writer and she's doing what I know some of you want to do. So, Susan, why don't you take us on the journey? How the heck did you get to Porto?
So it was fun because you and I were both talking about going abroad, leaving, and you and your wife were a lot farther ahead than I was. I was waiting for all my kids to get done with college. And I think I had told you on the last time I was on the show that I had gone to Morocco initially. I'd gone to Morocco to visit my son, and I thought, okay, I'll move here because I can live here for very inexpensively. And then I decided that I wasn't going to like Morocco. So I started researching. And so I knew nothing about Portugal. I'd never been to Portugal, but I knew that Portugal was affordable. It was sunny. It had a visa for people who were self-employed that I could afford because I thought of all European countries as having like the golden visas. Like that was the only option. Like you either had to marry into it or you had to buy your way in. And Portugal had had a good visa option, but the information to try to figure out what you need was impossible. It was completely conflicting. It was hard to understand because a lot of the stuff that you could find that was actually official was translated from Portuguese into English, not really taken into account idioms. So I finally called this woman who someone had reached out to me. I joined a Facebook group that was a Porto expats Facebook group, even before I moved here. And I started asking the group questions, which is a good thing to be able to do. It turns out that a lot of the people ask the exact same questions over and over. So the best expat groups will direct you to their files, that they go look in the files. It's all in there because we don't want to talk about this anymore. And I found someone reached out to me and she said that the person that she had used was really good. So I reached out to a consultant who kind of walked me through the process. Not all the way through, really. I reached out to her and I said, I want to move to Portugal. And she said, so you've been here? And I said, no, I've just decided to move there. And she said, okay, the government's going to think that's weird. You need to come visit. So my daughter and I came for a week. And I did know from my consultant person that I hired, and you can find them in all the expat groups, probably of every city that you want to move to, but that the consultant that I had hired told me I needed to come and get my tax number and I needed to get a lease, like that was registered with the government. So she helped me get my tax number, which was no big deal. I just met her one morning and she took me to the tax office. She had scheduled an appointment for me because she knew how to do that. And we went to the tax office and she just talked to the person and we gave him my address and 10 euros and bada bang, bada boom, I had a tax number. And then she said, okay, now you can get a lease. So I went with a real estate agent who I worked with here and she showed me some apartments. The thing was, a couple of the places that I thought I would be okay to move into. One of them, my real estate agent said, you don't want to live here. It's the insulation. There's no insulation. You're going to freeze to death. And I thought, oh, no, I'll be fine. She was right. I got through my first winter. There's no heating anywhere. There's no insulation anywhere. And I thought she was absolutely right. Another place, probably 2 or 3 places, people didn't want to rent to me because it was older people who didn't understand why foreigners wanted to move here anyway. And one woman asked to see my credit score, but she didn't even really know what a credit score was. She just knew Americans had them and she wanted to know, so it was like this whole thing I was starting to get desperate. Like, I don't care where it is. I have to have a lease to move forward with my visa application process. So Fabiola Verissimo, my Remax agent, ended up finding me an apartment. At that point, I was like, it was in my price range. And I was like, I don't care where it is. As long as I have an apartment and I can move in and I can move forward, I can always leave. Because with Portugal, you can leave with it like a third or fourth of the way through the lease. So it wasn't like I was going to be stuck there forever. So I had my apartment, I had my tax number, and then, I can't remember all I had to do. We had to register the apartment with the government. And Portuguese people, and I love this about Portugal, but it was a little hard at the time. They're very chill about everything. Things just take a lot longer than you think they're going to. It's not going to be a speedy process. It took a while for them to get around to registering the lease with the government. And I had to come on. I'm much more anxious. I'm usually the most anxious person in the room in Portugal. It's just like, is this going to happen? Do I need to pay now? Am I in trouble? Anyway, so that finally came through and I sent in bank statements. They asked for, it's a different system now because at the time you just had to mail it in. They didn't have an online process. Now they do. Anyway, you can upload all your documents now, and they wanted bank statements. They wanted to know that you had enough money to live on, which at the time was like the equivalent of 750 euros a month, which I could prove that I had that. They wanted to know that you had a lease. They say a place to stay, but apparently that's not what they mean. It's not okay if your buddy says you can move in with them. So you really need to get all the exact details of what's going to be okay and what isn't. I finally had it all done and I submitted it, and then it took forever. And there was all these conversations on the.
When you submitted it, were you in the US or were you in Portugal?
I was in the US, mailed it to their embassy in DC.
Yeah. One of the things I want people to understand is in almost every country, the immigration process starts in your home country.
Yeah. Usually. Yeah.
And 2, as we say in Mexico, mañana does not mean tomorrow. It means not today.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Right. So if you are an anxious, nervous, worrywart in a hurry, you're going to have problems.
You're going to suffer. Yes. And the thing is that they, on these forums, like these Facebook groups, I'd be like, oh, I sent in my application yesterday and today I got my visa. It's like you probably can't relate to this, but it's like how women talk about childbirth, like I went in the hospital and 4 hours later I had a beautiful baby and no pain. Those people, you want to kill them because mine took forever, months and months and months. And you just think it's not supposed to take this long. Nobody's taking this long. And then everybody's popping up with like, I got my visa today. I got my visa today. And you're just like, what did they do that I didn't do? Ah.
Let me interrupt you there. The one of the things that people need to understand is you're not in control.
Yes.
Right. And 2, this stuff. And I also wanted the fact that Susan hired someone.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, I'm going to get online and I'm going to figure this out and DIY it, do it yourself. You can do that. And I tell everybody, don't, because you only need one screw up.
Yep.
And you're back to square one.
Yep. Yeah. And I didn't want to hire anybody. I researched for a living. I thought I've got this. Maybe other people need help. I don't need help. I was so wrong. I needed help so badly because there were things that did not make sense to me at all. For example, one of the things they wanted to know was that I had contracts for the coming year that would total enough money for what they considered adequate living. And I'm thinking, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've always made enough to meet this criteria. I don't always know what I'm going to be doing every year. Things change. I'll be on a project and then the project will stall and I'll switch to a different project or I'll bring in something new. It just always changes. That was not going to fly with them. So I had to in fact, I sent, we were working on the last book and I had to ask you to sign this contract saying you were going to pay me this exact amount, which we didn't, either of us know if that's how much I was going to get paid. But it was just like the government just needed documents that said that my employers were okay with me working in Portugal and that they were going to pay me a certain amount of money. And with most of my clients, we have a contract at first, and then we just work together for years. Like we don't renew the contract. We don't have new bureaucracy. That was not okay in Portugal. So, and the fact that I could show them that I had made enough money to meet their criteria or exceed it by a lot sometimes for 30 years, they didn't care. Whereas in the US, the fact that you have a track record is more important than the fact that you have a contract for next year. So
yeah, the thing to remember is you're not in the US.
Yeah.
They have a different set of rules. It makes no difference how it's done in the US. And as I tell people, when you deal with immigration people and they say, stand on one foot, stick one finger in your ear, one finger up your nose.
Exactly.
Just do it. And more importantly, smile like you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
So okay. So you filed all your paperwork.
Filed all my paperwork, and then I waited and waited and waited and waited and waited. Everybody else was getting their visas, it felt like, except me. And finally, I was living in my daughter's house because I had moved out of my own apartment. I was sleeping on my daughter's couch, waiting for my visa to come through so I could jet off to Europe. And finally, about 3 or 4 months into it, I think it was in August of 2019, I still hadn't gotten the approval, but I'd been paying for my apartment for a couple of months already. So I was like, and people were like, "Would I really have to do that?" And I asked, "Do I really have to do that?" Yes, you really have to do that. That's how that works. And can't we just get an Airbnb? No, you can't just get an Airbnb. Like, it doesn't matter if it makes sense to you. This is what you got to do. And again, I don't know what the rules are now. Everything changed with COVID, but finally I said, well, I don't know if they're going to approve my visa or not, but I've been paying for this apartment. And if nothing else, I'm going to go live in it for 3 months until I get kicked out of Europe. And then if I don't get my visa, then I'll just come back. And that was my adventure. So I came to Portugal and I had probably been here 3 weeks. And finally my visa was approved, at which point I had to overnight my passport to my daughter, and she overnighted it to Washington, D.C., where they stuck the resident visa in and then overnighted back to my daughter. And then she overnighted it back to me in Europe. And that began the next clock, which my consultant really didn't help me figure out the next bit at all. So I was here kind of not doing the things I needed to do, which was get my business registered with the tax authority. Didn't really know I needed to do that. Because, in the US, you don't have to register your business with the tax authority. You do your thing. If you want to have an LLC, you can. If you don't, fine. So I didn't do a lot of things. And then I was getting ready to go back to the US for Christmas. And I was told, and I called my accountant, I called my consultant to ask her a question. And she was like, "You were supposed to have done this, 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 and this," which I did not know. So don't count on your consultant. Hire somebody to get help from, but also keep trying to figure out what your issues are. For me, the Porto expats, Americans and Friends in Portugal has been really great because she's got all these files and she's a consultant and you can hire her or some of the other consultants on the site. But then she's got updated files all the time about what the rules are. Anyway, I was scrambling and I was freaking out and calling this accountant who apparently I was supposed to call months before. Oh, I had been calling him, but he never called me back. And I just never got aggressive about it. I don't know what happened. Finally, I met with him. He started my business. Everything got done, but there was a bit of a panic in there.
Quick interruption. If you are enjoying this podcast, please rate it and review it on whatever podcast player you are using. And more importantly, would you mind telling a friend? Thanks, and back to the podcast episode. So what kind of visa do you have? What is it called?
I think it's a D7. I can't remember. It is a resident visa, is a long-term resident visa for people who are self-employed. So it's a self-employment visa. You have to have a business legally set up. And I just recently, just this month, switched to a different kind of business thing because there's one that's a freelancer business and there's one that's a uni-person business, and the amount that you pay in Social Security is way higher if you're making any kind of money on the freelancer than on the uni-person. So I switched over to that. And the taxes, I don't understand a lot of this stuff, but I really like my accountant.
Your accountant is Portuguese.
My accountant is Portuguese. He speaks perfect English. He learned his English in South Africa, so he sounds like he's South African.
Okay.
But he's, yeah.
Yeah. So what I want people to understand is whenever you're looking at resident visas, they're always tied to your finances.
Yeah.
How much money do you have? Almost every country wants to make sure that you're not going to be destitute.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you're set up and now you've got your business. I presume you brought all your clients with you.
Brought all my clients with me. Yes.
And
I started working for a Norwegian wave energy company, sea-based, that I had worked for before. And then there was a hiatus and then I went back. And I work for them a lot at this point. I work for them. Yeah. They're a lot of my life at this point.
So how do they pay you?
The wave energy company pays me in euros, and it's a direct deposit into my account.
In what account?
My new account. I had to tell you this part. My new account is a business. And I was in a big hurry because I was going to take my son to the UK to set him up for school. And my accountant sent me this list of business names. And he says, you can make your own business name, but it will take 10 days for the government to approve it, or you can choose from this list. And I didn't have 10 days for the government to approve it. So I chose from the list. And it was just kind of hilarious because some of the names that were on the list, it must have been AI generated because they were, it's like cosmic molecule and stuff like that. So I chose one that was palabras translucidas, which is clear words. So anyway, yeah. So I now have that business, and that's now, because I have a uni-person business, my accountant is in charge of all my financial dealings.
And you now have a bank account in Portugal.
I have had a bank account in Portugal. Okay. Yes, actually, I had a personal bank account in Portugal from the time I arrived. From the time I came the first time. You have to have one right away. I started with 200 euros in it. I started a business bank account after my first business was founded. And then I had to start a business bank account for this new business. And now I will dissolve the other business.
So the wind energy company pays directly into your Portuguese bank account.
Right. It's wave energy.
Okay.
Ocean waves. Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
So they pay directly into my Portuguese bank account. I still have American clients. I still have an American bank account, which is uses the address of my daughter's apartment. So those clients pay directly into my US account. That money either goes to stuff to help my kids in the US or to where I transfer it here.
and how do you transfer it?
Using wise.com. And it never costs very much. It's like,
Yeah, I use the same thing. All of my business is done in the US. All money is it goes into my former IBM credit union account at Amplify Credit Union.
yeah.
And I use wise.com to transfer money down to my Mexican bank account.
Yeah. And it doesn't take very long. Sometimes it's only a matter of hours.
How's business these days?
It's good. It's good. It's always changing. I used to be upset if anything changed, but things are always changing. So the wave energy company is going gangbusters for the most part. It was weird in the summer because I live in Europe and everybody's like, oh, I'll be taking July off. Yeah, I'll be taking June off. And one of my colleagues was just like, he took July off and then he just announced he's Swedish. And he was like, yeah, it's moose hunting season. So I'm going to be taking off a week in October. There's this whole like just taking time off thing that it's very unusual for me. Yeah, I'm mostly working for them. I have a friend who's used to be a diplomat for the UN and now she's a contractor. And she said, she's got me looking at UN contracts that are just part-time here and there remote, because I think that would be a cool thing to have, cool experience to have.
What do you know now that you wish you knew at the beginning?
You know what? It's really kind of off topic briefly.
That's fine.
I don't know if it's off topic. My big revelation was wherever you go, there you are. Because I was just like, I was walking along one day on the beach. I've moved from the old apartment was kind of, I moved to another apartment that is gorgeous and 5 minutes from the beach. And I absolutely love it. Oh, and by the way, I didn't say this. I had to work. I had to like make friends with the guy who owns this apartment before he was okay to rent it, because it was like ye old family homestead. His kids were born here. It's not a business transaction frequently. But when I was here and I was walking along, I'm like, I had work that I love. I live in Europe. I've always wanted to live in Europe, but I'm still in a funk, or I'm still bummed out, or I'm still this or that about something. And I thought, you're still you. It didn't all change just because you moved. Like whatever issues you needed to work on before, you still need to work on them here. So, the process of moving was very exciting and changed the subject for a little bit, but you're still you. And
the other piece is you've got to be able to go with the flow.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because none of this stuff happens on your time schedule. And as you said, you got there, you suddenly got your first place. Oh, that wasn't your dream place. It was never supposed to be. Then you're going to do something else. And you've got 2 of your kids living with you now?
No, I've got one of my kids living with me. He's seeking residency here. 2 of them, all 3 of them are here right now, though. Yep. So one of my daughter's here visiting. My youngest, who is going to be going to a master's in animation program in the UK. And so he's leaving next week. So he's not living here. He's just hanging here. And then he's going to go over there. But it is all about, and I know you've said this a million times, but it's just, you just kind of let go as far as if you want your life to look and feel the way that you want it to look and feel, it depends on what that is. For me, I wanted to be here. I wanted to be able to get on a plane. I took a plane to UK. It was 40 euros round trip. I want to be able to travel. I love the feeling of being in Europe. I love a lot of things about being in Europe, but it took me a year to figure out what to use for cream in my coffee because I couldn't find it. They don't do cream. And there's just things that you're just like, this is not how I would have things, but it's not my country. I'm just lucky to live here. So.
And have you learned Portuguese, or are you learning Portuguese?
Eu falo português. Yeah, we're learning. I'm learning. I have a teacher. She and I have not met for a couple of months because she's been really busy, and so have I. But we were meeting over Zoom a couple of hours a week, and she really helped me. The pronunciation, it was crazy because you can learn the words, but they're written the same often in Spanish as they are in Portuguese and pronounced completely differently. And if you don't have those tiny little differences in the way that you would pronounce this vowel or that one, no one can understand a word you're saying. But I don't know how anybody moves to a country without learning the language unless they just want to kind of feel like they're floating on the top of the surface. You can't feel like you're part of the community. You can't feel like you belong. And I think the lack of belonging is the hardest thing. It's fine when you're vacationing. It's not fine when you move someplace. And so you have to be able to figure out how to build those threads and establish belonging. And if it's only belonging with other expats, you're still just skimming the surface of the place. It just feels very untethered in a not good way. So.
Well, Susan, I know when you were going through the visa process, I walked you off the ledge a couple of times.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Because I was like, that's never going to happen.
Well, you were suffering from MSU. You were making stuff up.
I was. I absolutely was. When I finally got it, and now the COVID has changed. So when I go, I've lived here for 2 years. I've had my visa for 1 year. And next year they'll re-up it for 3 years. And then after I've lived here for 5 years, I can go for citizenship for the following year, which is what I'm going to do.
If someone wanted to reach out and contact you for work or anything else, how might they do that?
Probably email Susan@SusanLahey.com.
And we'll put that link in the show notes.
All right. Thank you.
Well, Susan, I've been waiting to have a conversation with you because we've got the 6 or 7 hours of time difference.
Yeah.
And thank you for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
All right. Thank you.
Susan has learned so much about herself by going through this experience. As a single woman, she has made this move on her own with the help of her semi-adult children. I want you to hear this, as I've been told by a number of female friends who are in their 50s and 60s and unmarried that they couldn't make this kind of move on their own. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com, sign up for the Career Pivot Weekly Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You will get a weekly update on this podcast, white papers, and new blog posts. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on Facebook and LinkedIn. You'll also find me on Twitter at Career Pivot. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-245. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.